Welcome to Reels on the Rocks, the show where your hosts Whiskey and Sweet Tea discuss film from the unpretentious perspective. In tonight's episode, we discuss the very odd, heartwarming, and hilarious experimental film, The Saddest Music in the World. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and as always, please be advised that spoilers are ahead. Hey listeners! I know it's late in November, but apparently Whiskey and I both have lives that we just learned about. But
got real busy, both of us, so your December is going to be super packed with episodes.
Exactly. Just so much coming at you from every angle. It's going to be like being attacked by an octopus.
But these next ones are going to be fire, I think, anyway. Really cool picks for, what was supposed to be November.
Which was experimental month.
So what are we watching today, T?
Well, first off, what are we drinking today?
Okay, yeah, so I've decided, especially with the last several episodes, I haven't been taking it too seriously. I've just been drinking whatever I've got. But especially with this film, I felt like I needed to actually step it up. So I went ahead and found a Canadian beer.
Ooh.
Yeah, right. So I am drinking, any Canadians listening, Moosehead Lager. It says fiercely independent product of Canada. I made sure it was from Canada, and beer has a large part to play in the film we're talking about today. So I thought it was appropriate. And just for full disclosure, I've already had one, and it tastes delicious. It tastes like a Heineken, honestly. So enjoying this while we talk about this film. What are you drinking, T?
So I was going to do beer too, but I don't like beer. It tastes like dishwater to me. But I did crack out some locally brewed e-cider by Austin E-Ciders, blackberry cider. Oh, it is so delicious. So far, I have not hated anything these people have made. So I think...
Is it Canadian, though?
It's not Canadian, though. It's from Austin.
See, that's what you should have done. Didn't have to be beer.
I did. I should have driven up to Total Wine and Liquor and just been like, excuse me, point me to your Canadian ciders.
Well, anyway, what is the film that we're talking about? If for the people who can't read.
So for the people who can't read or choose not to, today's film of topic is the experimental musical / comedy / historical film, The Saddest Music in the World, which is a lot more fun than it sounds to watch.
Yes, it is. And you listed off way more than I realized. I guess, like, when you say historical, is it actually based on something that happened? I thought the whole thing was so, ridiculous that, did some beer heiress actually hold a contest or something, or did you just mean that it's set in the Great Depression?
I always just assumed it was set in the Great Depression. Google classifies it as a historical film. Don't know why, because as far as I know, when I was looking this up, this is not a true account. Although,
it is so goofy.
But it sounds like it could, ironically, as weird as it is, it sounds like it's something that could happen. So
yeah. The only thing I would not believe is the whole beer leg bottle things later.
So we are getting ahead of ourselves. So this is a movie. It's really kind of a movie about one particular family. But essentially, the backdrop of this film is this beer heiress wants to, really kind of take advantage of the Depression era, which people consume lots of alcohol when they're sad.
Second film, by the way, in a row with Isabella Rossellini.
Yes.
And I don't know if you did that on purpose, but I definitely intend to talk about that.
But what a fun quiz. I've noticed we have a lot of Isabella Rossellini, but let's be real, she never disappoints whenever she's in anything. That's like her thing.
Well, so I hadn't seen her in anything besides Blue Velvet and an episode of Friends before these last two films. And I just want to say, I think this is my favorite performance of hers.
Yes.
In anything. So far I've only seen her in 3 movies, but this is my favorite character she's played. And partly, she gets to be funny, which...
Yes.
Last film she didn't really have too much of a character, and then in Blue Velvet she's just miserable for the whole movie.
It's really
so
just
it was nice
upsetting.
to see her having fun with a silly character.
So this movie, Isabel Rossellini plays a beer heiress who is holding this contest to determine which country in the world has produces the saddest music in the world. This is after Winnipeg is once again named the saddest city in the world, which is where this film is set, in Winnipeg, Canada. And then in the maker, we have this whole family. It's two brothers and their father, who are essentially all at some point caught in a love triangle. With
to put it loosely.
Yeah, to put it loosely.
More like a love rhombus, because there's four people.
Oh, that's true. That's true. So we had the main guy, Chester. He is really kind of scheming to get the money from this competition, and he is with essentially an escort this whole movie. This escort.
Oh my god! Wait. So I just have to say, there were a couple of lines that stood out, but one of my favorites that I intend to possibly quote at some point. I don't know, maybe like if the mood hits me, but it's definitely probably my favorite line in the whole movie is, "I'm not an American. I'm a nymphomaniac."
I love
this movie. Like again, like it does not sound like it would be a fun movie to watch, but this is definitely a comedy. It took me by surprise. And not only that, but this is like my sense of humor.
Yeah.
I've tried to describe it in the past, like, because I have a weird, strange sense of humor that goes all over the place. But this movie made me laugh out loud a number of times, and that was one of the times.
And that's like in the first like 10 minutes of the movie, too.
Oh yeah, and it's so strange too, because the other thing, we'll get more into it, but the other thing I think worth mentioning for anyone who hasn't seen it, or doesn't watch before listening into our shows, is that the style of this director, and I didn't do any research going into this, but I did recognize the director's name, and so I was like, what has he done? His whole shtick with all of his movies is he ages them so that they look like older films.
Right.
Like he really likes like the kind of era that this movie's set in, like the 20s, the 30s.
Mm-hmm.
But he does shoot on film, but then he artificially ages it after the fact so that it has that grainy, like it looks like it was made in the time period. So that's really all I knew going into this movie. I didn't know it was a comedy. I also saw it labeled as like a musical, like as a tag which I kind of, we'll get into that. I do kind of agree with that. It's just when you hear musical, you expect there to be like dance numbers and stuff. Yeah. And he does a stylish thing I thought was kind of interesting. But that's like just talking about the obvious thing that if you don't know about this movie is that it looks kind of like a silent era film.
Yeah.
Like it's black and white. The film is very, grainy, and they do have color in some areas, usually for like different tonally like kind of scenes, but it's not even real color. It's sort of what they did back in the time.
Oh, it's like colorized.
Technicolor existed. They would hand draw in the colors. So that's kind of an important aspect of the movie we haven't brought up. But so sorry to interrupt, but go back into the story.
So while this competition is going on, everybody in the world shows up to this, and then there is this family who also lives in Winnipeg. It's a father, and his son's name is Chester, and Chester's is currently with this escort. And then we find out later the father knew the beer heiress or dated her previously, and she was also seeing his son at the same time, and there was a car accident, and she lost one leg, and then the father, who was a doctor, because he was drunk at the time, cut off the wrong leg. And then so she lost two legs. And then so they have this whole disagreement going on about that, and then we have his other son comes to participate in this competition. He has lost his son has died, and then his wife took off. And then we find out later in the movie that his wife is the escort that his brother has been hooking up with. So, like he said, love rhombus, there's just people all over the place. And then we have we have the whole backdrop of the contest. The contest goes through. It ends up with the two brothers going against each other head to head. And I'll go more into that later in the significance of that. And then we have the younger brother. the one who lost his wife, he's the one that emerges as the victor, and then the other one is being stabbed to death by Isabella Rossellini's character. He kind of goes off on this, I refuse to cry or be sad. This is one of his whole things. He didn't really feel that sorrow was real, and accidentally burns down the theater where this whole thing's being held.
So spoilers if you've never heard the show before.
Yes.
But anyway, and you also forgot one of the most important elements of the film.
I forgot. Yes, the beer heiress.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You silly goose! It's the prophecy at the very beginning.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. It is prophesized by a fortune teller at the beginning of the film that he will meet an unfortunate end. Like,
if he does not address the root of his sadness.
Exactly.
Which he doesn't, because he's like the happiest character in the film.
Right.
And that makes him kind of infectiously likable. But you also know it's BS. Like, he's just doing it, like, almost kind of to, like, force success. It's like the fake it till you make it mentality. He says he's like this Hollywood musical producer, even though he has no money. He's essentially homeless. He doesn't have, but he's chipper all the time. Oh, we're going to put on a show and stuff. So it makes sense that it's like, oh, he's actually quite sad. He just never addresses it. And especially like then it kind of flashes back to his mother, which again, like this is kind of a great like if I were to say that there's a theme in this podcast episode, it would be like the importance of tone.
Yes.
Because if this is a film, I feel like if you just watched it without any sound or like being able to see the acting or anything, it would look kind of like a sad movie.
Yes, it would.
Because it has all of the typical, again, it's in black and white. There's some very I was gonna mention this like I said so earlier, but instead of having like dance numbers and stuff, the thing I thought was really interesting is that this director uses a lot of Soviet montage.
Yeah, which is kind of very sad. But hold on, before we get into that really quick, the last thing I need to do is I need to go through, the specifics.
Oh, yeah.
So, sad, I know, we are kind of all, it's because we started with the liquor this time. That's why.
Oh, yes.
Saddest Music in the World, 2004, directed by Guy Maddin. Music was by Christopher Diedrich. Cinematography by Luc Montpellier. Production design by Matthew Davies and written by Guy Maddin and George Tullis. Adapted from an unproduced screenplay by Kazu Ishiguro. And it was up for 3 awards at the Directors Guild. Outstanding achievement in production design for feature film, outstanding achievement in directing feature film, and outstanding achievement in picture editing feature film. And it won 1 Directors Guild Award for outstanding achievement in production design. Starring, we have Isabella Rossellini as Lady Henley, Mark McKinney as Chester, Maria de Medeiros as Narcissa, David Fox as Theodore Kent, and Ross McMillan as Roderick / Gravello the Great. So
yeah, he didn't seem to do anything. But like, I actually was curious what he was in when I was IMDbing this after watching, and he doesn't seem to.
Yeah, he doesn't even have a Wikipedia
have like
page.
A career besides this movie.
Well, what I thought,
which is weird because he was one of my favorites. The brother. Honestly, everyone was really good in this.
Yeah.
But and the the nymphomaniac we spoke of, I did recognize her immediately as Bruce Willis's weird girlfriend from Pulp Fiction.
Maria de Medeiros.
Yeah, and she's it's because of her, partly her face, but she's got a very distinctive voice. Like,
yeah.
I'm pretty sure I've actually heard her voice some like cartoon characters or
Oh,
something.
most likely.
But anyone who's seen Pulp Fiction, you know exactly who I'm talking about, the weird baby bump chick who screws up with the watch. So that's
and then for all my sitcom lovers out there, Mark McKinney, who played Chester, you may recognize him as Glenn from Superstore. So that was kind of weird. Very, very different character.
Yes. And like the guy who played the quote unquote American, he was in some sort of Canadian sitcom in like
that's
the 2000s or the 90s.
That was
I
Chester.
saw that when I was scrolling through IMDb.
Chester, Mark McKinney.
Okay, so he was in sitcoms before Superstore. Then.
Yeah, that's just what
Gotcha.
that's what I recognize him from. It's the most recent thing I'd seen him in. All right, so let's talk about this movie. Very interesting story.
It's the story I felt like was less important than just sort of the performances. Like it kind of felt like every scene was almost sort of a gag.
Yeah.
I mentioned like this movie made me laugh so many times, actually laugh too. And one like you mentioned the losing both limbs.
Yeah.
That was probably my favorite like comical scene because it's played again, it's really hard to describe how to do tone correctly, and a lot of it I feel like kind of has to come down to the way the actors perform. And in this film, as well as like a lot of this director's other work, he prefers to have silent film acting. And if you don't know the difference, like essentially silent film acting is almost kind of overacting on purpose because back before there was sound, you kind of had to express the emotion very visually because otherwise, you know, the dialogue was done by like a title card.
Yeah.
So you kind of had to act the scene out so the audience would be able to understand it without the title card. You know, obviously the title cards would come later, but you were supposed to get the gist of it. If you've ever seen any silent movies, you see lots of very animated expressions and things like that. And I feel like he kind of used that to comedic effect.
Oh, yeah.
Because they played this very straight, all of the characters.
Oh,
but
most
they did it in
definitely.
such a goofy way. And that scene where she loses her limbs is like the perfect example. Because what is happening is not funny, but the way it's happening is very funny. And things like how the his father is so drunk and he's like, get out of my way.
And he's
no,
like,
Dad,
this
you're
is a
drunk.
puzzle.
Yeah, and I knew what was going to happen before it happened because I'm like, let me guess, he's going to cut off the wrong leg because he's so trashed. And it happens, and it's so ridiculous, like the idea that he's so drunk and he's so determined to prove his worth to this woman who doesn't like him.
I love how
mutilates her.
He's warned so many times. He's like, "You're through the skin. You're down to the bone." He's like, he keeps telling him, "Stop."
And also, like when Isabella Rossellini reveals that she has no legs is also incredibly funny to me. Like, because for the whole beginning of the movie, up until the main character, the American guy, comes to see her, she's sitting at a table, so we don't know. And she seems very, you know, she's a boss lady. She's very powerful. She, you know, all of the, you know, rich shareholders or whatever that are there to see her are super excited about the contest, and she's very confident and sexy. And then he comes to see, and you know they've got some sort of past between them, but you don't know what it is. And when she just rolls out from behind the desk and she's got no legs,
right?
It's just like, what happened? And you know, the flashback happens and everything. But it's really hard to explain unless you see the film, but the tone, it's so obviously a comedy. Like within the beginning, like when the prophecy at the fortune teller happens, it's again a lot in the acting, the fortune teller's acting kind of like this silly like witch kind of character.
Oh yeah.
And like, touch the ice and stuff, and all little character quirks too, like how the main character's father is such a like patriotic Canadian that he hates anything that isn't Canadian. You know, how dare my only son or one of my two sons say that he's from that he's American. What a disgrace. Which is also funny because then his other son is representing Serbia. So it's like neither of his sons wanted to be Canadian. And I also love how the other son whose wife is dating the main character, whenever he's performing, he puts on this getup that is so, I don't even know how to describe it. It almost looks like funeral clothing.
Well, I think with his giant hat with the veil coming over it, I mean, I think...
Well, he's also wearing a fake mustache and like fake bushy eyebrows, and it just looks... And I don't know, man. It has something to do with like his facial expressions and stuff. He's so overly sad, and other things about him too. Like he says he has sensitive skin, so if anyone just like lightly touches him, he like recoils in pain.
And sensitive ears. He's like, your stomach's grumbling. Stop that.
Right? it's so goofy, everything about this, and it's such an interesting film. I like, again, both of these films that we're watching, I'd say this month, but like this episode and next episode, we both had never seen either of them.
Yes.
You knew more about this film going into it, but both of these, this and the one we're reviewing next time, I went in very blind, and so just going off of the title, I was kind of expecting this to be like some sort of historical drama about something nasty. So I was so pleasantly surprised when it was something more akin to like a Mel Brooks movie.
Yes. Well, so the reason why I know so much about this is my dad actually saw this when it premiered at Sundance. He was in the audience for the Sundance premiere.
Nice.
And so he came back from this trip and he was like, I just saw the weirdest movie. And so I had heard for years about the movie with the chick with the beer legs. And how this was just this bizarre movie about this woman. And all I remember hearing about, this woman walks around with legs, with glass legs made of beer or something. And it was just the oddest thing. And so when we were sitting down and we decided, oh, we want, November to be experimental month, I was like, oh, I can finally watch this movie and figure out what this is all about. So I kind of knew sort of, going into what it was about, what the whole thing with the legs, but it did not prepare me for just how just over the top and just bizarre that this movie is.
For sure. And I could oh man, what did your dad say what the audience reaction was? Because I could imagine that it would probably be pretty. I would imagine there's some laughing in the audience and stuff. I would hope that they were receptive to the comedy aspect of it. It is Sundance, so you've got the more cultured tastes and everything like that. But did he say like what the audience reaction was like? Were people laughing? Were they enjoying themselves?
He was. Well, he said from what he could remember, because he claims to be that old. He said from what he could remember, people seemed to really enjoy the movie. There wasn't like his, film festivals, people are notorious for just walking out if they hate the movie. He said there was no like exodus or anything of people. So
my favorite is the Swiss Army Man reaction where people were actively booing and walking out. And then there was another, I forget what film it was, but there was a famous like, I think it was a Cannes Film Festival, but something was screened and a famous film critic said, "This is shit," but in French. Like, and I think it was like a famous movie too. I can't remember, but yeah, I don't know. Part of what's great about going to the cinema, which is nice now that things are opening back up again, is it's very fun to kind of see everyone's reaction, especially when it's like, really like receptive to the film they're watching. Like I recommended the Lighthouse to you, and I saw it here in Los Angeles to a packed house, and it was actually pretty great to see people like actually engaging in the film and being entertained, by something that's a little bit more art housey. And I feel like that's the same with this. That's something I feel like when you hear about experimental films or art house or anything like that, there's sort of this way that it's going to be completely just, you can't even understand what's going on.
Yeah.
It's so like avant-garde that it doesn't make any sense. I don't think that's always that shouldn't be the case. Obviously there are cases like that, but some of my favorite art housey sort of experimental movies are things like Andy Warhol's films, for instance, which were really strange, but also kind of had a stroke of genius in them, like his famous film Blowjob, in which that is happening, but you don't see any of it on camera. All you see is like the man's upper torso, so it's like kind of there's almost a tongue-in-cheek sort of funniness to it. But with feature-length artsy films like this, something I feel a lot of lesser directors don't really understand is it still should be entertaining.
Yeah.
And a lot of my favorite experimental directors understand that. Like, for instance, Eggers, who did The Lighthouse and The Witch, both of those are great. You don't have to be a film snob to appreciate them, and I still will say they're both very entertaining. Or another one of my favorites is David Lynch, and even though his films are super out there, you could watch Blue Velvet or Mulholland Drive or even Eraserhead, and there will be elements of comedy or just things that are supposed to be there just to kind of be interesting and keep you entertained, even though he's trying to make a point about something else.
Right. And well, speaking of the Lighthouse, you talked about how you got to see it with the Packers. I got to see it. I was like the only one in the theater because it was like it was like 8 a.m. at ArcLight. And it was like the
still in.
Yeah, I was still not, and it was like I think it was like one of the last weekends it was showing or something. It's the only place I could find it. I was like at 8 a.m. I was the only one there, and it was awkward because at ArcLight they come out and they talk to you, and this guy was just talking directly to me. It was uncomfortable. But
yeah, man, that year before everything locked down, I went to a bunch of movies at the ArcLight, and it was always. It's just great. Like, you don't get that. I feel like other movies that I had a really great, like, packed house with cool people were, like, Jojo Rabbit and Parasite. And, obviously you can see those films other places, but one thing I do like about Los Angeles is that you kind of have people that are into movies living here, either because they work in the industry or they just grew up around them.
Yeah.
And you won't get that, you'll be able to see Parasite, wherever you live, but you might be like one of 5 people in the theater while everyone's like, I don't know, watching like an Adam Sandler movie next door or something. But, but that's, getting back to this film, that's something I feel like is overlooked in, quote unquote artsy avant-garde movies, that this is a perfect counterexample of that. Where
right.
You don't have to like weird artsy movies, and you will probably still find this entertaining because at the bottom or at the end of the day, it's a comedy and it's trying to be funny, and I think it succeeds.
I think it succeeds too. I wasn't like laughing out loud, but I was very pleasantly amused by a lot of the stuff that was going on in it. And like you said, I think one of the reasons that this movie is so enjoyable to watch is because it's a movie that's made to be entertaining, and it doesn't even like try to make it seem like there's anything wrong with that. And I feel like you said, a lot of art house films do. Like you mentioned, The Lighthouse. I have no idea what happened in that film, but I was very entertained by it. And I think it's like he says, because he knows, you have to make a good piece of cinema. You can't just be whatever you also have to have some sort of entertainment value in it. I think that's what makes it such a strong feature.
I think like if you're just making it for art's sake, fair enough. But yeah, like if you want it to be something that really makes an impression on people, you do still have to kind of engage with your audience, and win them over. And again, like there's plenty of examples. I just named a few, but another great art house film from the last couple of years that I haven't seen yet, but just looks like a fun movie is The Love Witch. And that's trying to kind of encapsulate 70s cinema. And it looks just like this film. It looks like a film from that era, but it's kind of a more feminist take on like this like femme fatale witch like killing men, I think. Again, I haven't seen the movie, so I'm not even sure if she's killing them or she's bewitching them or what. But anyway, like it's like a nuanced take on that, era of filmmaking. And that's the great thing about this film is I think is a pretty obvious comedy. It might not be your cup of tea. Humor is very subjective. I could see someone watching this and just not finding it funny. I wasn't in stitches for the whole movie, but this did make me actually laugh out loud quite a few times. And I think part of it was also just being kind of caught off guard. Because, again, I didn't know what this movie was about. I was expecting this to be
some tragic art film.
The fact that, like, the runtime, too, also surprised me. Again, with the title, I was thinking this was going to be some historical drama about some horrible tragedy or something.
It was a 4-hour epic about the Holocaust.
Exactly. That's kind of what I was going into it. I actually, again, before I, queued this up to watch, I kind of was exactly thinking that's what it was going to be, like a Holocaust film. I was just like, oh boy, here we go. Let's ruin my night.
It's not that Jerry Lee Lewis movie where he plays a clown during the Holocaust.
Yeah. Well, there's that one, and then there's the one by that Italian filmmaker who kind of blew his career quickly after with like a Pinocchio movie and stuff, where he's like he's not a clown. It's not the Jerry Lewis one, but he's like It's the same idea. He's
Yeah.
like a goofy character in a concentration camp, anyway, not this movie.
Not this movie. So okay, so this movie. One of the things, like you talked about it before, is you talked about how grainy and uh just like you said, it kind of invoked eras of like Soviet film title cards. Like specifically, one of the things I'm thinking of was when they would be like Mexico versus
Oh god, that was
Siam.
the way they did the musical competitions was so funny. They had the boxing bell, ding ding, like
Yeah.
and the title card, like Mexico versus
And then they had
Canada or whatever.
and then they had that buzzer thing to like change between the two.
And the way Isabella Rossellini did the thing, which, I mean, this did come after Gladiator, so I'm sure he was kind of mocking that a little bit.
Yeah.
But she had like the sideways thumb, and she'd choose which, and that's also so funny. Like she's the one and only judge, so it's like, is this really the saddest music in the world, or is it just? And that actually kind of comes into play in the plot too, because the main character ends up kind of going back into having an affair with her, and so she's voting for him because she wants him to win.
Yeah.
Because they're sleeping together again. So like, just the whole thing is so absurd. And it was funny too, because I had my own opinion about which music I thought was sadder, and sometimes it wouldn't be the winner. And it's like, it's so stupid. Just
I loved
what a weird thing to want, and also how goofy. So every time a team wins, they get to slide down a slide into a pool of beer.
Yeah.
So it immediately, if the music was kind of sad, it immediately deflates any of that just by having this goofy, like almost something out of like a Japanese game show. Just, here, take the beer slide.
It reminds me of those things. Remember, like the game show, like Fits in the Hole or whatever, and it was like you make the pose, and this wall comes at you, and you have to kind of like fit through it. I don't know. That's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah. Human Tetris is what they called it in Japan, and then they called it Hole in the Wall in America because we have no
that's
creativity.
right. And then American Dad, they called it Fits in the Hole.
Oh, gotcha.
That's where I got that from.
That's still better than Hole in the Wall.
Yeah.
Like, why change it from Human Tetris? That's a perfect title for what it is.
So,
but the Soviet montage, like, I'm talking kind of more about, and you probably know what I'm talking about, but it's like, I'm thinking of like Eisenstein films like Battleship Potemkin and things like that, where it's just like a lot of coverage kind of spliced. If you are a big film nerd and you know what I'm talking about, then you know what I'm talking about. But it's kind of extremely difficult to describe to someone who's never seen one of these like 1920s Soviet propaganda films. But it's a lot of coverage kind of spliced together to sort of invoke an emotional response, but also sort of like it was used in propaganda films because they would hope to kind of instill revolutionary ideas in people. But like, and Eisenstein's written books on the subject, but the thing that I noticed it in was actually the musical moments during the competitions. When they were playing, there would be a back and forth between the bands, but whenever, especially the main character's brother, who's representing Serbia, played his music, there would sort of be this like strange montage of kind of like sad images and close-ups of his face and the audience and things, and it made it it played into the comedy, and I don't know why. I'm having trouble articulating why, and I feel like maybe it's just because of how jarring Soviet propaganda style editing is.
Yeah.
But it was also like a very interesting choice for like a musical movie.
Yeah, it was. I was actually going to touch on is a lot of this movie is just different parts of it are just homages to just different kind of stylistic film styles that were in that time period. Like you talked about the Soviet montage, and then they had a lot of the lighting. Especially in Isabella Rossellini was very reminiscent of kind of like that 20s sort of 20s glamazon, like when she was in that meeting at the beginning, and we just get nonstop of her jewelry just like reflecting light. Like that's very that's very much of that period.
Well, and also the beer legs. It's very goofy and funny, but also there was sort of, it reminded me of like that 1920s flapper kind of Great Gatsby-ish sort of style.
Yeah.
Like it matched the sort of clothes she wore and everything. But it was, and that, by the way, I was thinking about this earlier today, knowing that we'd be recording, but I was like thinking about how they even pulled off that special effect, and it's actually pretty impressive because I'm trying to think, like when she's standing up with the beer legs, I am kind of thinking that she's just hiding behind them. I don't know. I thought it was a pretty good special effect, honestly. And whoever designed the legs, I liked how it was like constantly fizzing.
Yes,
and
I love it. She talks about how they sparkle and everything from all the fizz and everything that's in there.
The woman's got taste. She didn't make the legs, but if I were in her position, those are the kind of legs I'd want.
I mean, they even I think if I remember correctly, they even were so detail oriented that women's hosiery at the time had a very noticeable seam that went up the back of their leg, and I'm pretty sure if I watched correctly, I think that was an imprint that was on the glass beer legs. There was actually a raised area that was supposed to look like the seam on the back of like pantyhose or something.
Yep, I know what you mean. Well, and also the way the beer foamed, actually, kind of it ended right at where there would be sort of the tip of the stockings.
Yeah, the garters and everything.
Exactly. Oh man, and there's like a bit where she's dancing the jitterbug, and I was kind of cringing the whole time, expecting her to fall over.
Right. I was like, these are gonna have to break at some point, right? They have.
Well, obviously, it's especially when she's constantly asking him to check for cracks. You know what's gonna happen at the end.
Well, besides
the murder, I was not expecting that.
Wait, you weren't expecting what?
Her to stab him.
Oh, that kind of came out of nowhere.
Partly because it almost seemed like she was upset at him for the beer breaking, like the glass legs breaking. But I was like, why are you mad at him? He didn't do anything.
It was his brother. It was his brother with the frequencies on his cello. So well, another thing that I thought was really cool is there was even kind of an homage, I thought, to kind of like silent era horror films. When they would do these like super close up shots. It almost looks like it was just like a spotlight. And everything else was black around. You know what I'm talking about?
I do. And that I know what you mean. That was part of what I was talking about with the Soviet era montage, because that was something like. Have you seen Battleship Potemkin?
I have not. You know me.
So you should. It's not that long, but there's kind of a famous scene in that's shown in a lot of film classes and stuff to kind of emblemize what it like encapsulates Soviet montage style, and it's this bit, you probably have seen it and don't know what it's from, but it's a baby carriage falling down the stairs, and there's sort of like these horrific zoom-in close-ups of like people's faces all mixed together, and the scene goes on for like 5 minutes of the carriage just falling down the stairs, and it's spliced in with other like weird things that I don't even remember, because again, it's his style of like, oh, like this is meant to be the fall of capitalism or whatever he meant. But that's kind of part of the reason I thought of Soviet montage, was because that sort of close up you're talking about, that I always saw that in Eisenstein films. But you're not wrong. I definitely, and also it kind of goes back to what I was saying at the beginning about silent film acting. Where all of their facial expressions were just cranked up to 11, like very animated, and just if they were sad, they were depressed. If they were angry, they were furious. If they were happy, they were elated. And that's part of that style of acting. Yeah. But it also kind of comes off as funny, especially when you have sound. And that was the other interesting thing, is the sound mixing was very clean. It did not the sound did not sound aged.
Yeah.
And I felt like that also kind of made it funny to me, especially like in the opening bit with the fortune teller, because the film looked very old, but then it was just like, hey there, son, how you doing today? Just...
Really quick, those shots I was talking about, so some of those were achieved through using Super 8 cameras, those really old hands. They used those to film that, and so if you watch the credits, some of the actors some of the
We're
extras
hand holding the Super 8 camera.
were credited. Yeah, we're credited as cameramen because they handheld the Super 8 camera to record those. So I thought that was really interesting. But talking about the acting, yes. The acting was, like you said, it was very over the top, silent film acting. But at the same time, the way that their voices were, they also kind of remind me of. Do you remember when they kind of went from silent film, they went to the talkies, and everybody kind of just, the way they talked, they overstressed every syllable, they pronounced everything, they enunciated everything, and it just kind of just sounded weird.
Yes,
and that's kind of how this
again. I
people
think
were.
that was for comedic effect,
Yeah.
and that's part of what made me, especially the main character. I keep calling him that, but the American
Chester.
theater producer. He is so funny the way he talks, because he talks like an American stereotype.
Yeah. Yeah.
At least from that era, not really anymore, but like just that, hey there, buddy, how you doing?
Yes.
Ha-cha-cha-cha,
Yes.
gonna put on a show today. Like, he just never is upset about anything. He's always like got that shipper tone in his voice, and he's also, man, I should have written them down. Again, like, there's so many lines that I found funny, and most of them came from him. Like, he would talk, it was almost like the hard-boiled detective lingo,
Yes.
but like not angry. Like, he'd say things like, we gotta give this crowd a case of the sniffles if we're gonna get on to the next round. It's just like that stupid, not like early 20th century kind of way of talking.
And then like they always I was going to say that, yeah. And then like Isabella Rossellini, when she's talking about how she was like sleeping with one of her workers, she was like, I forget what she says, we slide on the seesaw or something weird like that.
Yeah.
Just this use of just this early this early 20th century lingo. It was and like you said, just added to the comedic effect, that with their performances, with their enunciation, with everything. It was kind of just led to sort of just this hilarious portrayal.
The other thing I will say was stand out is the costume production design, that whole thing, because there were a lot of very funny gags that weren't from the acting or from anything, just visual things. Like one thing that stood out to me, I thought was really funny at the beginning, was when they're taking a streetcar in Winnipeg, mm-hmm. and it's buried under the snow. Like, it just comes up and a hatch opens up and they go into it like a submarine.
Yeah.
And it's running underneath the snow. Just things like that.
About that, yeah.
So,
well, speaking of costume design, so I was reading an interview with the director. Again, this is also not, unfortunately, this is not a movie that a lot of people talk about or really kind of look into. There's a few things out there, but an interview with the director, he said that, they were on like a shoestring budget for this movie. I think the whole movie was made for like $3 million. It was shot in 24 days. So they didn't have a budget for costumes, but so they were auditioning these ethnic groups to play the music from their homelands. Like a group of Mexican people would play the people from Mexico. They were trying to find like musical groups that did that, and so he had to stress on that they all had to bring their own costumes because they couldn't afford to dress everybody. So they were able to get some people, and he talked about how in the audition process he was like, after a while I was kind of, I had these people just come in and just play me a sad song from your heritage. Then he said eventually what he started doing was he started having two groups show at once and have them kind of play off of each other. And then he said one time there was a women's, I think they're actually in the movie, a women's bagpipe group showed up, and they started playing as soon as they got in the elevator, and they were on the 7th floor. So he heard them coming all the way up the elevator on the 7th floor from the 1st floor, and then they all came out and performed. And he said, of course, they got the job. But he talked about this audition process.
They were in the film, and I remember I actually like bagpipe music because I'm a strange person, but I will say I didn't find their bagpipe music all that sad. I thought Mexico was underrated. I thought they should have gone further. That was the other funny thing, was how the American theater producer, every time a team lost, he would just recruit them to America.
Yes. So I actually have a theory about that. So I was thinking a lot about this movie, and even the director said there was a lot of kind of just messages and stuff in there, and I'm like, I thought that was very telling that America couldn't really come up with an act on their own. They had to borrow from other cultures. Because if you really think about it, because people have thought so before, America really doesn't have a culture. It's kind of just a blend of other people's cultures.
And I thought that was actually kind of, I don't know, I didn't, you could look at it cynically. I actually thought it was kind of nice. It's like, oh, we're strong, but we're strong because we have so many different people to get to to help us win, more or less. And to be honest, Canada is kind of in the same boat as America. Like, they've got their own culture up there, but they're also a melting pot. They've got, a bunch of different groups that settled. And as we've seen from the past year, they also have kind of an interesting history with their indigenous people. So,
Yeah.
Mr. Madden, like throwing stones in a glass house.
Well, I mean, to be fair, Canada didn't make it very far in the thing either.
Oh, no.
To be fair.
Yeah, that's a good point. Didn't he lose in the first round?
Yeah, in the first round.
No. I think he won one, and then she disqualified him. But yeah. And that too. I don't think they actually ever dated. I think he was infatuated with her, and then she started dating his son, and he couldn't give it up.
I think I'd have to go back because that beginning was kind of a blur. Yeah.
But I feel like they didn't even ever date. I think he wanted to date her, and she just wasn't interested. And then I don't know, but
yeah, there's that comment, and then there was also this commentary, kind of about. It's not really a commentary, I guess, but there was this underlying theme about what real emotion is, and no matter how hard you really can't fake what people really feel and what they understand. Because if you really think about it, even at the end of the competition, who ends up winning? The person who had real emotion and had had actual sorrow to put out there. And I thought, that was kind of an interesting sort of thing that they talk about. And if you really think about it, also the whole concept is about people, and we still have this problem kind of in society too, about people want to talk about who really has it the worst. Groups of people, people in friend groups, people are constantly in a competition to be like, well, I've had it worse.
Yep.
And that's kind of was the theme of this, is that instead of like just believing that people have had a bad life or had a bad, or just down, we kind of make them put on a show for us that they really are sad, even when we're just talking to them.
Well, and it goes back to, it's funny because at the very beginning of this episode, I said that the whole conceit of this film is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And yet you're right. Everyone's constantly in a competition to prove that they have a worse life than everyone else in real life. But you put it in the context of a movie like this, and it's a very absurd thing to do. So comedy can be just as emotionally resonant as other types of films. So like having a message in a comedy film like that can resonate, like just by seeing how absurd it is in the context of this film. You can be like, oh yeah, it is kind of silly that we do that. And it is true. And that character, I think, was kind of the secret protagonist. And the whole faking your emotions thing, I think that actually is very insightful, T. Because I think a lot of the characters are kind of guilty of that. Like, for instance, the non-American nymphomaniac, she lost her child, and she's sort of running from her emotions and, sleeping around. She actually has no memory of her marriage.
Yeah.
Or the child or anything. Like, it's vaguely there, but she has what do they call it? Dissociated from it so much that she does not even remember it being a thing.
Yeah.
And then you kind of have the father, who's sort of, I guess you could say that he fills his emotional void with patriotism.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got Isabella Rossellini, who is also deeply insecure about her legs and, very sad about, not being able to keep her man around and all of these other things.
Right.
And she sort of, it's like power is the thing that she, power, influence, popularity, beauty. She almost kind of wants to emulate success just to sort of brush off her insecurities. So I agree. I think that's actually a very insightful point about the film, because I think that was kind of, every character in the film has some sort of deep emotional trauma that they're trying to
they're trying to basically
They're trying to like bury it
exactly,
essentially.
and the only person who ends up dealing with their emotional trauma wins the contest, which is meaningless in the end.
And his wife comes back.
And his wife comes back to him. Well, if you notice, they try to show moments of happiness in the movie. That's when the movie becomes color for like a few minutes.
Yes.
And you pointed out earlier, especially that ending scene, how it's not real color. It's like this fake drawn in color. And if you really think of it, the ending scene is she feels, but she's the happiness is not real in that scene. It's all based on that she still hasn't dealt with the underlying trauma. So the momentary happiness that she gets from having these legs back, because she never really healed her or dealt with her problems before then, as soon as they're gone, it goes back to black and white. And like you said, and the fact that it was also that fake drawn in color, it was fake happiness. It wasn't real happiness. That guy thought he was happy because he was going to win and he didn't. And so that's when it goes back. So I really think colors used to show happy in this movie. And I do think, and I could be wrong, I have to go back and rewatch, but I think the color looks more real though, when they have those flashes of, like flashbacks, like in the past when they were happy. You know what I mean?
Yes, I did. They used color a couple of different ways. The one that stood out, I remembered, was the hand drawn in, just because it was very visually distinctive, and you do not see that anymore. Like, that's so old. That's like early 20s attempts at color before things like Wizard of Oz made it more normal to have Technicolor in films.
Right.
So, but I do think there were a couple of different ways that they colored the film, and I know what you mean. I think there was a scene where they used more traditional like Technicolor.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think it was like a flashback.
I still can't get over those legs, though. Those legs are really pretty.
Anyone looking for like a very, very good Halloween costume that will get you a lot of attention, there you go. You will win every competition if you're able to make the Isabel Rossellini's character from this movie. You will win every costume contest next Halloween. So,
so reading more about this movie, Guy Madden, the director, he said, I was reading
John Madden,
Guy Madden,
feel it, play it, football.
Oh my god. Guy Madden, the director, there was an interview that he did with there was some sort of anniversary screening, I guess, in I believe it was somewhere in Washington. I could be, or maybe it was Oregon. I forget where it was. He was in attendance for it, and he talked with a paper, and he says he barely remembers making this movie.
I mean, what he said? You said it was 24 days of shooting.
Yeah, it was 24 days of shooting. Yeah.
I mean, it's a pretty short amount of time. Also, like, I mean, this film, it's not. I can believe that because there aren't that many different settings or anything. Like a lot, at least half of the movie is the musical competition. So if you shot that over like the course of a week, you've got half the movie right there. But that actually makes me wonder, like, because I haven't seen any of his films. I was aware of him and his style, and I know he's made some stinkers before. Who knows? Maybe in the future we'll watch what is it? The Twilight of the Ice Nymphs. But he. Yeah, that is interesting. I'm curious where this ends up on his like favorite films that he's worked on or made.
He literally said in this interview, he was like, there was a woman and a music competition. That was kind of basically how he was describing it back to this reporter. It was interesting that I'm like, oh, seriously, you can't remember this movie? This is such a, like, for all of us, it's like, this movie's so bizarre. How could anybody forget? Like, I remembered this movie for 16 years just based off of vague descriptions of it. And I was like, you don't remember this? Are you okay, sir?
So I take it from that interview, he wasn't super fond of this one then.
Well, no, I think he enjoyed it. I think for whatever reason he just didn't remember making it.
I can buy that. I'm curious because I haven't seen a lot of his other movies, but like I'm curious where this falls on his favorites, because this is going to be kind of a high bar for me. If I see any of his other movies, I'm going to be comparing them to this one, because if you couldn't tell, guys, I really liked this one. So if you're wondering if I'm going to recommend it at the end, spoiler alert. But that's where I'm curious where it falls on his personal favorites, because again, I feel like this is going to be a hard one to top, especially if I don't know if he normally makes comedies or if this was just kind of a one-off thing, but everything just gelled super well. The tone, the style in which he shot it in, the actors that he cast, like everything just worked perfectly together.
Well, and just I guess for me, what was interesting just about this movie. Actually, no, you actually just said it. For everything, it was a movie that's just nothing about this should work, and it all works.
It's like Elvis Presley's favorite sandwich. Every ingredient sounds disgusting until you try them all together, and then
and then it's just
then for some reason it works.
He actually talked about in this article again, I think it was with Filmmaker Magazine, and he says he said he started to cry or not cry, he got kind of just what's the word I'm looking for? Wistful, maybe. And nostalgic about because he was watching the credits at the end. He's like, oh my God, I worked with all these people worked to make this movie thing, and I have no idea what happened to any of them. I don't know where they are. He says, I hope they're all doing it. He says, I don't know where they all went, but I hope they're okay.
Pretty sure a lot of them are fine.
But so he talked a bit about also in this article about how he came across Isabella Rossellini for this part. He said that when he wrote this was adapted from another screenplay that had been kind of passed around a lot, and I'll get to that in a minute. But he says that when they were adapting it, he was working with a screenwriting professor that he had studied under, which I guess he had a better screenwriting professor than we did, because I don't think I'd want to collaborate with any of mine. But he said that they had always had in mind Isabella Rossellini for the part. They thought they could kind of get it because at this point she hadn't really done anything in a while, so they might have been able to get her. And he said they tried to go through his agent. Their agent wouldn't really give them the time of day. And he said he was walking in Central Park and he saw her. She was out in Central Park and she was petting somebody's dog. And so he walked up and petted the dog with her. And then he was kind of like, Isabella, I have a script for you. It would be great. He said they ended up going to her house and watching movies, and then she agreed to do the part. I'm like, talk about a chance encounter.
Seriously.
So this was adapted from a screenplay by Kazu Ishiguro, and I apologize if I am butchering that. But in the original script, he said this had been passed around for like ever. This had been written, I think, back in the early 80s. And he first got a hold of it in 2000. And so he was kind of not really into it. It was set in London in the present day, in which at the time was 1983. But the premise was that there was a contest co-sponsored by a CNN-like news organization and a distillery that would reward countries for singing the saddest song. So he worked and he liked the premise sort of, but he didn't want to produce it as is, so he kind of took it and he rewrote it and adapted it and made it into the movie that we both saw. And, I thought that was really kind of interesting because you always hear about... You always hear about scripts going and basically just dying, and what I thought was interesting about this, he talked about how he took something that he didn't like and turned it into something that he did like, and I thought I've actually never thought about that, and to me that was kind of very interesting to hear how this the screenplay came about.
Well, it sounds like he had the wisdom to know that he could take us, because again, I've said this already, but the premise of this film is kind of absurd and ridiculous, and if you played it seriously, I don't think it would be a very good movie. So he had some very strange eccentricities for what he decided to do with the material, setting it in the Great Depression in Canada. Canada makes sense because he's a Canadian filmmaker.
He's from Winnipeg.
But Great Depression, making it look like a film from the Great Depression era, like strange ideas. But if you, I would love to see what the original screenplay read like, because it probably sucked, honestly. Like if you were trying to make like a drama or something,
mm-hmm.
I think it would come off as in what's the word I'm looking for? Fake.
Yeah.
like fake drama. Like I don't insincere. There we go. You know what I mean? Like trying to be really insightful and like, oh, how sad everything is. Like, but it would just come off as like Hollywood schmaltz.
Yeah.
I think this film does say some pretty deep things, but the fact that it's not taking itself too seriously, I think, is a real strength.
Yeah, I agree.
And also makes it more entertaining. Like that for me is kind of one of the best aspects of this movie. Is as weird and experimental as it is, I think I could show this to just about anyone and they would find it interesting, if not hilarious. But what you just described sounds like garbage. I'm not surprised it didn't get produced for like 20 years.
Well, he's also this. You talked about how some of his other movies hadn't been that good. He said this was the first time he made a movie that wasn't completely generated from like his own obsessions. So I guess this was like the first project he had worked on that he didn't come up with entirely on his own. I guess this is his way of saying it. And yeah, I thought that was kind of cool thing to admit, because I think about this, like I think a lot when I like sit down to write something, is I kind of go back to the same pool of stuff that interests me, stuff that I like, and I never really think about dipping my toe into something that I don't like, and kind of being like, okay, well, if I add maybe some salt and some paprika to this could really cook.
Absolutely. And also just taking things again, like if the script was like meant to be very serious and he just kind of took a different approach to the same material, it's surprising how you can take a story that might not work and just change a few little things and suddenly it becomes really, really good.
Yeah. And like you said, I'd want to read the original screenplay for this and kind of see where this kind of fell on that spectrum.
Well, and again, this movie's interesting because I can talk ad nauseum about how much I like it, but it's like telling someone, hey, I had this sandwich and it had fried haddock, pickles, peanut butter, and chocolate sauce, and it was the best fish sandwich I've ever had. And you have to try it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like it would taste very good, but and it's kind of the same thing with this. It's like, it's a comedy, but it's about depressing things, and it's also looks like a silent movie, and it sounds like the most insane movie you'd ever see, but I really can't recommend this enough. It's not a very long movie. It's not. Honestly, like, it's easy to find on multiple places to rent. Mm-hmm. I highly recommend it to anyone listening to the show who hasn't seen it. If us talking about it hasn't spoiled the movie, I'd say check it out. It's a good time.
I own it on DVD.
Especially with the year we just lived through. It's probably kind of a good movie to just watch, like a very depressing period of history and laugh.
Yes. I agree. So it's that time of the show. I think you've already said recommend, not recommend. You go first.
I hate it.
No,
burn it.
Burn it.
It's great. Highly, again, if anyone listening sounds mildly interested in this, watch it. Big time. This might be a new favorite comedy for me, honestly. This was a good one.
And I'll say I definitely recommend this. I went into this knowing it was experimental and about the beer legs. That's pretty much it. And I was like worried I was going to have no idea what was going on in this movie. And it's pretty easy to follow. The experimental really just comes from the comedy and the filmmaking style. It's a fantastic comedy film. And despite its somber message, I do think it has a very happy sort of optimistic outlook at the end too.
I would say so. So 2 recommends for both of us.
2 recommends for both of us.
Tune in next time for the next Isabel Rossellini film on the Rossellini cast.
Because literally, what else are we gonna watch?
Yeah, that's the podcast now. It's just
It's
movies
the
with her.
Isabella Rossellini show.
But we can't. We did have Zoe Deschanel month.
We
so
did.
I guess this is just Isabella Rossellini 2 months.
Just 2 months in a row.
2 months in a row.
But yeah, make sure you like, subscribe, check out this movie. It's available to rent in most places. And if you're ever on eBay, it's pretty cheap to pick up on a DVD. I have it because my mom got it for my dad as a gag gift because he went and saw it. But yeah, it's a very enjoyable movie. Check it out.
And if you have anything you'd like for us to review, be sure to scream at us on Twitter. We will not take any requests unless they are screamed at us in all caps.
Oh my god. And we will catch you all in the next one.
Have a great one, guys.
Oh, you're not going to say stay thirsty?
Stay thirsty.
Reels on the Rocks is a production of La Prince Laboratories. It is edited and produced by Alejandro Castillo and features original artwork by Asa Esparza and original music by Pat Mars. Follow us on Twitter at Reels on the Rocks and tweet at us with any movies or topics you'd like us to discuss in the future.